I'm certain that at least one point in your life, you've asked yourself big questions where you're like, on your own, and you think to yourself, questions like deep questions that are like big questions, like why do I exist? Something like, or like how am I thinking? How am I alive right now? All these questions are signs of conscious awareness, and conscious awareness is um, central to what it means to be a living, breathing human being. But what exactly are human beings? What does it mean to be a living, breathing human being? Are we just a walking sack of neurons? Are we maybe machines? Are we souls confined to physical bodies? Or are we a mixture of the few? Some of the loudest voices to answer these questions come from neuroscience. And its response to this question is you are neurons. You can think because those neurons are firing, and you are just a brain. End of story. So I'm here to beg the question, are we really just a brain? So let's begin with what the brain is. I can confidently say that every adult at least has a basic knowledge of what the brain is. Now, granted, you might not be able to name the lobes or reference which cranial nerves are responsible for your sense of smell, but we all know that this mushroom sitting in between our ears is composed of billions of neurons. So that's where I'll begin. The neuron is the most basic functional unit of the brain. There's three essential parts. You have the cell body, which generates the energy needed to drive the activities of the cell. You have dendrites that receive messages from other neurons. As you can see, there's an impulse going through this thing right here. And the axon is what sends it onto the next neuron. This will be an axon of a peripheral neuron, which is so just a chain of neurons is a lot like copper, I guess you could say. It just conducts and goes to your desired point. An impulse from a neuron can actually travel up to 275 miles per hour. And as you may know, these impulses are responsible for your gross and fine motor skills. Motor skills are like movement and like pinching your fingers like this. They're also responsible for your special senses like taste, touch, and vision. However, those impulses are just that. It's just a conduction until it reaches your brain. You can think of your brain as a coterie of geniuses, and a coterie is like a small kind of just a group of experts, basically. And all these experts are experts in their own areas that are focused on the protection of your body and the well-being of your body. When an impulse reaches your brain, the thalamus is at the center of your brain. It acts kind of as like a front desk, and it directs that impulse to a certain section where it's decoded, and then there's a response after. So if I walked you through an impulse, let's say I touched a stove, my sensory fibers in my finger would say, ouch, that's hot. It's an impulse on my arm up to my brain, where the thalamus would set it to my frontal lobe, and the prefrontal cortex where it decodes that message as pain, and then prompts another impulse sent out to the muscles in my arm to pull away before I get like a burn. So what are its capabilities? The brain has 2.5 petabytes of storage. And as an example, that desktop right there is probably around 500 to gigabytes to like a terabyte of gigabytes. And 1 terabyte is 1,000 gigabytes. 1 petabyte is 1,000 terabytes. So 2.5 terabytes is about 2.5 million gigabytes. So that's just like incredible amount of storage. The brain is the most complex part of the human body, and it has been named the initiator of body movements, seat of intelligence, controller of behavior, and interpreter of the sentence. The brain is the undisputed source of many qualities that define our humanity, and is the crown jewel of the human body. I like this picture because you'll see it a few more times, but I'm going to ask you the question, how do we know it exists, it being the brain? So our question is, how do we know the brain exists? And you might say that's kind of a stupid question, but I want you to answer it. And this light bulb is going to be what shines the light on our question. With physical things, we look at science. And while you're thinking, you probably thought, well, we know it exists because we can see it, touch it. If you cut someone's skull open, you could hold a brain. Science is the systematic study of structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation, experimentation, and the testing of theories against evidence obtained. This is how we've come to understand physical phenomena. Specifically, neuroscience is the science of the brain and is how we have come to better understand it. Neuroscience has helped us establish the essential functions between the brain, which are to perceive, interpret, and react to stimuli. No more and no less. Those are the bare bones. But what about emotions, thoughts, ambition? Where do these things come from? If they were physical attributes, we wouldn't be able to find them or see them. Try as it might, neuroscience simply cannot explain it. Raymond C. Tallis, a philosopher, poet, novelist, cultural critic, retired medical physician, and clinical neuroscientist, put it this way. Trying to look at the brain and find things like love and wisdom is a lot like listening to an acorn through a stethoscope and trying to hear the whispering woods. I thought it was a really cool quote, so I included that. So if science has the answers to all things physical and is unable to resolve our question, maybe they originate from somewhere or something that transcends the physical. Maybe the answer lies in the metaphysical. Metaphysics is considered a branch of philosophy. And when we think philosophy, we think religion. But how does religion have anything to do with our emotions? Religion relates humanity to spirituality, and the thought of spirits bring rise to that of the soul. I included this picture. I thought it was really cool. So we as humans, created in God's image, we are like God. And when we think God and we see number 3, we usually think the Trinity. So like the Trinity, we have our own little Trinity inside of us. The body would be what we call world consciousness, and it relates us to the world and the things we're around. So I could touch this board. The soul is what we call self-awareness, and that's just that I am me, Will is Will, Sam is Sam. It relates human to human. And the spirit is what we call God conscious, or God awareness, and it relates us to God through like prayer, things like worship and church and stuff like that when you're reading your Bible. The idea, or the soul, it's metaphysical, immaterial, lives beyond death, and is the essence of a human. The idea of the soul is prevalent through our culture. We eat soul food, we find soulmates, and when we're in a dark place, we go soul searching. People go to the spa, do yoga, and detox. All of these things are centered around achieving well-being at the deepest level by attending to this entity we call the soul. It also has a historic significance. Belief in the soul seems to have originated in Greece, where fascinating minds like philosophers Socrates, Plato, Pythagoras thought about life's big questions. Pythagoras believed in reincarnation. That is belief that our souls are not necessarily tied to the one particular body, but it can go and occupy different bodies after death. This belief in reincarnation is held by many Eastern religions like Buddhists, Hindus, and Sikhs around the world today. Plato argued that the soul occupies and gives life to a body, but it does not need the body and exists without it. I think Christians obviously closely align with Plato's argument because we believe the soul lives far beyond death in our bodies and will one day be reunited with God in heaven where it belongs rather than find a new body. The Bible clearly teaches about the existence of the soul, and that is what makes us innately human, and more than just a brain or firing of neurons. The soul is the core of a person breathed into us by God at birth. Jesus taught his disciples about the nature of the soul when they grew anxious about what might come of them for following Jesus. And he told his disciples, "Do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell." Jesus explains that there will be those who persecute you, but then goes on to restore our confidence to this verse. Your physical body may be harmed in this world, but your soul is untouchable. However, it is dependent upon God for its eternal existence in the life to come. Therefore, as a Christian, there is only one person who deserves my fear, and that is God. So how do we know that the soul exists? It being the soul, our question is, like I just said, how do we know the soul exists? But what would be the light shining on our question? I think that would be more like religion. You could look at the Bible. As a Christian, obviously, I'm going to look at the Bible and look for proof of the soul. And there's verses like Romans 12:2 that I had it memorized. Do not conform to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is God's will, what is perfect and good. If we are not to conform to this world, and the world believes that we are just a brain, then that obviously gives us reason to believe we're not just a brain. So what is the relationship between mind and brain? Mind being your soul. There's one view called reductive physicalism, and that is belief that most materialists and scientists would hold. It's just your brain and mind are one. There's no difference between the two. There's non-reductive physicalism, which is your mind arises from your brain. So this is based on the assumption that, well, not the assumption, but like the statement that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. An example of that would be like a gun. If I had a gun and I took it apart, it would just be parts. But putting them all together gives me the ability to shoot a bullet. Just like the brain, all of its pieces together gives rise to a mind. And this is substance dualism. That's what I hold as a Christian. Most Christians probably believe in this. And it's that the mind and the brain are two separate entities all together, and they interact with each other but never like cross paths. So how do we know that the relationship exists? Our question is, how do we know the relationship exists? And the light would be, again, would be religion, but I'm going to use a little science and more like disproving science to kind of let us know how it exists. Science's argument against the soul, like I said, science holds the view that we are a non-reductive physicalist view, that we are just mind and body together. Science's biggest argument against mind-body interaction is causation, and this is based on the conservation of energy. It states that energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one to the next. So, as an example, if I hold the controller here, it has a lot of potential energy right now. If I drop it, the potential energy becomes kinetic energy, and the kinetic energy hits the ground and disperses into the floor. All that just to say it's a flow of energy. Nothing is going into this to like make it more. There's no creating the energy. With causation, there are many different views. There's the Humean view, which it says we have observed A is usually followed by B, and we have developed an expectation that when we see A, B will follow close in suit. The probabilistic view is that B is more likely to occur given A, but does not depend on it. For example, blue light causes brain damage, but not all brain damage is due to blue light. Counterfactual view is according to which without A first occurring, there could be no occurrence of B. So if the stove couldn't turn on unless I turned the dial. All this is to say that the definition of causation is very vague, and science claiming that causation just proves mind-body interaction really isn't saying much at all. But that's not all I have to say. To debunk it, we could look at gravity. We know the effects of gravity, and we live in it every day. We understand that gravity keeps our feet to the ground and prevents us from floating around this room. In the sense of causation, we could say that gravity causes us to stay in contact with the ground. However, I would be incorrect in saying that energy is transferred at all, because there's really no definition for gravity energy. So does general relativity break the law of conservation? As a dualist can argue that, like gravity, the notion of mind energy is just simply not defined, and hence one cannot even apply the principles of energy conservation to mind-body interaction. The mind, like gravitational field, could cause a change in energy of the brain without energy being conserved or transferred. Another way we could look at is quantum mechanics. Now it's a big word and a scary word, but it's basically quantum mechanics is foundational to physics to chemistry, chemistry to biology. So something that's true in quantum mechanics is true, and it's indisputable. A well-established and verified theorem in quantum mechanics, known as Bell's theorem, shows that there are correlations between quantum states that cannot be contributed to interaction and certainly cannot be to the transfer of energy. To do so would require the energy to travel faster than light, which is impossible. So we have yet another exception to what a dualist can use as an argument against causation. So now that we have sufficient reason to believe that there is indeed a possible relationship, how is it that they interact? As a dualist, I believe humans possess a conscious mind that is distinct from their bodies, but each are capable of influencing one another. Unfortunately, human consciousness in relation to the brain is not very straightforward, but your mind and body work in conjunction to constitute your identity. The case of Phineas Gage is a prime example of how connection between mind and body. Phineas Gage lived in the 1800s, and he worked on railroads. Back in his day, the method for breaking big rocks to lay down tracks, they would drill a hole into the big rock and stuff dynamite down the hole with a metal rod. Obviously, that's kind of a recipe for disaster, which is what happened. When he was stuffing the dynamite down the rock, it prematurely ignited the dynamite, blew up, and it shot the rod up his chin and out his head. So there was a hole through his head. So obviously he was presumed dead, as there was a hole in his brain. But miraculously, he woke up a few minutes later. But unfortunately, his whole personality had shifted. His attitude changed dramatically, and a once well-mannered man now had a propensity to profanity and ill manners, or inappropriate behavior. There are many cases where brain damage causes a change in personality, similar to that of Phineas Gage. It is also prominent in degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia. The key feature being that on all these cases, whenever the brain is damaged, there is similarly a profound effect on the mind. Mind and brain, although not identical, are clearly in common connection with one another. With all this having been said, my conclusion is that, as humans, we are incredibly sophisticated beings with a highly intelligent brain that far surpasses any technology that we can create. In ways, we are similar to these computers in the sense that our brains receive, integrate, and respond to stimuli, much like a computer would respond to a keyboard. However, we are so much more than that because we are so much more than just a computer because we are conscious, self-aware, and capable of feeling emotions. Our souls animate our otherwise computer-like being, and it constitutes our thoughts, experiences, and gives us life. But mind and soul are not one and the same. They are separate entities intertwined to compose a complete identity, each playing a central role and each depending on one another to construct our day-to-day lives. Thank you for your time.
Panelists, are got anything, any questions or comments from Ben?
So, for Phineas, would you say, because that's a fascinating marker of evidence, but I feel like those who would say they're one and the same, their response might be, is he not a different person?
Well, I looked at it like if the brain and mind are in connection. Yeah, I see what you're saying. They could also, I guess, they could use that argument. But I was thinking of it as if the brain is damaged, then the mind can't, like, its connection is kind of severed-ish, and he just changed dramatically as a person. But yeah, I do see what you're saying. I never thought about it like that.
This is one of those, anywhere where science and philosophy meet.
Yeah.
I want to have this conversation with you again in 2 years after you get some science under your belt, and I just want to hear what you think. You did it as a non-science guy. Like, I really appreciate that you didn't take for granted that I knew. There's a whole lot of things your audience needs to be able to wrap my mind around before you can even begin the conversation.
Yeah.
And you did a great job not taking that for granted and articulating and communicating the science so that you can even begin the conversation. So I really appreciate that. And I really applaud you taking a big bite out of a complicated thing. So, well done.
Thank you.
Coach, you got anything?
Beyond me a little bit. That's what I appreciate about Ben. He's a lot smarter than me.
But he just don't take you, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, sure.
Your dress is better than me. Can we just also acknowledge that versus you?
So Ben, I really, you know, I geek out on this stuff also. So like that was fun too. Like hearing these things come out of your mouth and you actually sound like you know what you're talking about. Anybody can say these words, right? But putting them together in a way that you did, I was really, you've got a real knack for taking a whole bunch of stuff and putting it in an orderly fashion that doesn't take all day long, like some people do, and but still doesn't. You didn't really sacrifice any accuracy for brevity.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. Like that, I'm telling you, that's a gift. Like that's a skill that a lot of people typically have to work really hard on to figure that out. Also, yeah, like I love the fact that you're seeing how science has its limits. As fascinating and as interesting, I mean, the brain having the neurological pulses moving at 200 plus miles per hour through a body that's a hundredth of a mile long. Like, that's crazy, right? The however many, what is it, petabytes?
Yeah,
That,
like 2.5.
yeah, that's wild. But despite everything what science is able to tell us, at some point in time, scientists just kind of have to throw up their hands and say, your guess is as good as mine. And that's really cool that you found that border and you're wanting to see what's there. So I applaud you for that. Also, you did a fantastic job of articulating where religion plays a part. And it makes sense that religion would be something as common to the human experience as it is, given that it does so much work for us. You know, in a day and age where a lot of people want to back off talking about religion, doing work like in terms of their worldview and their philosophy and so on. Yeah, that's really refreshing to hear you say that kind of stuff. I got questions, but I'm afraid everybody else will be super bored with them, so maybe we'll geek out about that. I'll tell you what we got. When do we get out of here? 35?